Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The cemetery stretched before me like a wound carved into the earth. All gray stone and twisted iron beneath a sky that couldn't decide between rain and something worse. November had teeth here in the Northern Territories. Sharp, cold, biting through my wool coat as if fabric meant nothing against grief this old, this vast. I pulled my scarf tighter, blonde hair whipping across my face in strands that stuck to the tears I'd been shedding since crossing the gate. 3 years. 3 years since they'd buried him. The tomb rose ahead, massive and imposing even in death, as he had been in life. Black marble veined with silver, carved with symbols I'd spent months learning to read. Ancient pack markings, territorial claims, warnings to enemies long turned to dust. They said he'd killed 17 challengers before his 20th birthday. They said his eyes could freeze blood in veins. They said he'd never loved anything except power. They didn't know him the way I did. My boots crunched over gravel and dead leaves, each step an effort against the wind that seemed determined to push me back, to tell me I didn't belong here. Maybe I didn't. The official mourners had come and gone years ago. The pack leaders, the council members, the females who'd preened and postured for his attention when he lived. I'd watched from the edges of those ceremonies, invisible as always, my presence tolerated only because my father had served the crown before illness took him too. I was nobody. A low-ranked wolf from a bloodline so diluted we barely shifted anymore. My mother used to joke that we were more human than wolf, and maybe that's why she'd survived as long as she did in a world built for predators. Before the fever took her last spring, she'd gripped my hand with surprising strength and whispered something I still didn't fully understand. Compassion isn't weakness, Elena. Sometimes it's the only thing strong enough to survive. I hadn't known what she meant then. I still wasn't sure. The tomb loomed closer now, and I could make out the inscription carved deep into the stone. Ronan Ashford, Grey Alpha King of the Northern Packs born in blood, died in glory, glory. They'd called it glory when the assassin struck during the treaty summit, when his body had been found torn apart, when the entire pack structure had nearly collapsed into civil war. The new Alpha, his cousin Sebastian, had stabilized things. But everyone knew it wasn't the same. Sebastian was strategic where Ronan had been instinctual, political where Ronan had been primal. Safe. I'd never wanted safe. My knees hit the cold ground before I'd consciously decided to kneel, my hands pressing against the marble that somehow still held warmth, as if something alive pulsed beneath. Foolish thought. Dead was dead, even for kings. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words cracking in my throat. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I was too afraid to." The sob caught me by surprise, violent and raw, dragging up everything I'd buried for 3 years. I'd loved him. God help me. I'd loved him from the first moment I'd seen him at my father's funeral, standing apart from the other mourners with that terrible stillness that made even the strongest wolves nervous. He'd looked at me, really looked, not through me the way everyone else did. And something in his ice-blue eyes had cracked just enough for me to glimpse the loneliness underneath. We'd never spoken. Not once. What would a king want with someone like me? But I'd watched him. In the great hall during pack gatherings, I'd positioned myself where I could see him without being seen, studying the way he moved, the careful control he maintained over every gesture, every word. I'd noticed things others missed, the way his jaw tightened when Sebastian made certain suggestions, the barely perceptible flinch when females touched him uninvited, the exhaustion that lived in the set of his shoulders when he thought no one was paying attention. I'd seen him. And now he was gone. "I brought you something," I managed, reaching into my coat pocket with shaking fingers. The small bundle of dried lavender and sage felt absurdly inadequate against the magnitude of this tomb, this loss. My mother used to say these herbs brought peace to troubled spirits. I thought maybe. Foolish. So foolish. He'd been a king, and I was leaving him weeds like some pathetic offering to a god who'd never answered prayers. I placed the bundle at the base of the tomb anyway, my fingers lingering on the cold marble. I miss you, I breathed, so quietly the wind almost stole the words. I miss you, and you never even knew I existed. The air changed. It was subtle, barely noticeable. A shift in pressure, a sudden absence of wind, a quality of silence that felt less like quiet and more like held breath. The hair on the back of my neck lifted, that old instinct that even diluted wolves still carried screaming that I wasn't alone. I should have stood, should have turned, should have run. Instead, I stayed frozen, my hand still pressed to the marble, my heart hammering a rhythm that surely every predator in the cemetery could hear. You're wrong. The voice came from directly behind me, low and rough as gravel, carrying an authority that made my wolf, weak as she was, immediately want to bare her throat in submission. I knew that voice. I'd heard it in my dreams for 3 years, a ghost that haunted every quiet moment. Impossible. You're wrong, it said again. Closer now, so close I could feel body heat at my back despite the November cold. I knew exactly who you were. My hand fell away from the marble as I turned, slowly, terrified that movement would shatter whatever hallucination grief had conjured. The gravel bit into my knees as I shifted, my vision blurring with tears I couldn't blink away fast enough. He stood 3 feet away, solid and real and alive, wearing dark clothes that blended with the lengthening shadows, but couldn't hide the predatory grace of his posture. Taller than I remembered, broader through the shoulders, his black hair longer now and falling over those ice-blue eyes that had haunted my memory. Ronan Gray. The dead king. Very much not dead. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't do anything but stare as my mind tried and failed to make sense of what I was seeing. How? The word came out strangled. You're dead. They buried you. There was a body. There were witnesses. The pack mourned. The pack mourned a convenient fiction. He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate, the way a wolf approaches something skittish and prone to bolting. The council needed stability, my cousin needed legitimacy, and I needed everyone to believe I was gone. Why? It was barely a whisper, my voice lost somewhere between shock and a relief so intense it physically hurt. His jaw tightened, that familiar gesture I'd memorized from a distance. Because there were traitors in the pack, Elena. High-ranking wolves who'd grown comfortable with corruption, who saw me as an obstacle to their power. The assassination attempt was real. I have the scars to prove it. But instead of dying, I let them think they'd succeeded while I rooted out every conspirator. He knew my name. He'd said my name. You've been hiding for 3 years? I asked, my mind still spinning, watching the pack fall apart, watching Sebastian struggle, watching... The words caught. Watching people mourn you, something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or pain carefully controlled. Not the entire time. The first year I spent healing, tracking the conspiracy, eliminating threats. The second year I spent rebuilding what they'd tried to destroy, establishing networks Sebastian doesn't even know exist. And this year... He paused. Those ice-blue eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my wolf whimper in a way that had nothing to do with submission and everything to do with recognition. This year I've been deciding whether the pack deserves their king back. And I somehow found the courage to ask, have you decided? No. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with where I still knelt, close enough now that I could see the scars they'd mentioned. Thin silver lines across his throat, disappearing beneath his collar, close enough to catch his scent, pine and smoke and something darker, more primal. But watching you cry at my grave might have changed my mind. My breath caught. Why? Because in 3 years, you're the only person who came here for me. His voice dropped lower, rough with an emotion I couldn't name. Not for the king, not for political advantage, not because protocol demanded it. You came here alone, in the cold, to mourn someone everyone else has already forgotten. And you brought... He glanced at the bundle of herbs, something almost like tenderness softening the harsh lines of his face. You brought peace to my troubled spirit. I realized I was still crying, tears streaming down my face in the fading light. I thought I'd never see you again. You were never supposed to. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and when I didn't, his fingers brushed my cheek, catching tears I couldn't stop. His touch burned, even through the cold. I've been watching you, Elena, for longer than you know. Did you really think I didn't notice the girl who stood in the shadows at every gathering? Who looked at me like I was something more than a weapon the pack wielded? I tried to be invisible. I managed, my voice shaking. You failed spectacularly. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile if kings remembered how. You were the only light in rooms full of predators. And when I died, when I had to die, knowing I'd never see that light again was almost worse than the actual dying. The world tilted. 3 years of grief, of loneliness, of loving someone I thought was forever beyond reach. And here he was, real and alive, and telling me he'd noticed. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Why reveal yourself now? His hand cupped my face fully now, thumb tracing my cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything I'd ever heard about the savage Alpha King. Because I'm tired of being dead, Elena. And because if I'm going to reclaim my throne, I need to know. His voice roughened, vulnerability bleeding through the careful control. I need to know if the woman who cried at my grave would stand beside me when the real monsters come. The question hung between us, enormous and impossible, and somehow inevitable. Behind him, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the cemetery, turning the marble tomb into something almost beautiful. I thought of my mother's last words. Compassion isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only thing strong enough to survive. I placed my hand over his, still pressed to my face, and felt the tremor that ran through him at the contact. The mighty Alpha King, undone by a simple touch. Yes, I said, and watched ice-blue eyes flare with something fierce and possessive and terrifyingly alive. I'll stand with you. His answering smile was sharp enough to draw blood, and beautiful enough to break hearts. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the first howl of what would soon become many, the sound of a dead king rising, and the pack that had forgotten him about to remember why they'd feared him in the first place. The safe house wasn't what I'd expected. Then again, nothing about the last hour had matched any expectation I'd ever held about my life. Ronan led me through the forest in silence, his hand wrapped around mine with a possessiveness that should have frightened me, but instead felt like an anchor in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. We moved quickly, his pace accommodating my weaker wolf, even as I sensed his impatience, the coiled tension in every line of his body. 3 years of hiding, of watching, of waiting, and I'd somehow become the catalyst for whatever came next. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a half-remembered dream, small and unremarkable except for the wards I could feel humming in the air around it. Protection spells, strong ones, woven by someone who knew what they were doing. How many people know you're alive? I asked, as he guided me up the wooden steps, his hand now resting at the small of my back. 4. He pushed open the door, ushering me into warmth and flickering firelight. Now 5. The interior was sparse but functional. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, doors leading to what I assumed were a bedroom and bathroom. Maps covered one wall, stuck with pins and connected by red string and patterns that looked like conspiracy theories made manifest, which I supposed they were. Sit, Ronan said, gesturing to the worn couch near the fire. You're shaking. I hadn't noticed, but he was right. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me trembling and cold despite the cabin's warmth. I sank onto the couch, watching as he moved through the space with the same predatory grace he'd always possessed, pulling down mugs, heating water, performing domestic tasks that looked surreal on someone I'd only ever seen commanding armies. The other 4, I ventured, needing to fill the silence with something other than my racing thoughts. Who are they? My second, Marcus. He's the only one from my previous inner circle who wasn't compromised. Ronan's voice was measured as he worked, not looking at me. A witch named Iris who maintained the death glamour and healed my wounds. A tracker called Denver who helped me hunt the conspirators. And a tech specialist, Jude, who's been feeding Sebastian carefully curated misinformation for 2 years. He brought me tea, pressing the warm mug into my hands before settling onto the couch beside me, close enough to touch, but giving me space I wasn't sure I wanted. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the new hardness there, the lines that hadn't existed 3 years ago. "Sebastian doesn't know?" I asked, comprehension dawning with a sick twist in my stomach. "You let your own cousin believe you were dead?" "Sebastian is a good man." Ronan's jaw tightened, that familiar gesture. "But he's weak where it counts. He makes alliances with wolves who smile while plotting his downfall. He trusts the council members who orchestrated my assassination because he wants to believe in the best of people." His ice blue eyes met mine, burning with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You know what wanting to believe in people gets you in our world, Elena? Dead," I whispered. "Or worse." He took the mug from my hands. I'd been gripping it so hard my knuckles had gone white, and set it on the low table before us. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone suspected. Council members, yes, but also pack enforcers, territory leaders, wolves I'd trusted with my life. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were trying to dismantle everything the northern packs had built, sell our territories piece by piece to foreign interests. The casual way he said it, as if treason and territorial dissolution were merely inconvenient facts, sent ice down my spine. "And you stopped them." "I removed them." The euphemism was deliberate, his voice carefully neutral, but I understood what he meant. The scars on his throat weren't the only marks 3 years had left on him. Quietly, methodically, making each death look like accident or natural causes or territorial dispute. By the time Sebastian realized the council was shrinking, I'd already eliminated the worst of the corruption. I should have been horrified, should have recognized the ruthlessness for what it was, the actions of a king who valued power over mercy, control over compassion. Instead, I found myself asking, how many? 17. The same number as the challengers he'd killed before his 20th birthday. The irony isn't lost on me. 17 wolves, dead by his hand. 17 conspirators who'd tried to destroy everything he'd built. I thought about my mother's words again, about compassion and survival, and wondered if there was room for both in a world this brutal. "You're not running." Ronan's observation pulled me from my thoughts. He was studying me with that unnerving focus, as if trying to read something written in a language he'd forgotten. "You're not even looking at the door." Should I be? Most people would. He shifted closer, the movement subtle but deliberate, predatory instinct wrapped in human control. "I just told you I've spent 3 years executing wolves in secret, that I've been manipulating my own cousin, lying to the entire pack, operating outside every law we hold sacred. You should be terrified, Elena." I met his gaze, held it despite every instinct screaming at me to submit, to look away, to acknowledge the vast gulf of power between us. "You're not a monster." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You barely know me. I know you noticed a low-ranked wolf who tried to be invisible." The words came easier now, conviction replacing fear. "I know you stood alone at my father's funeral when everyone else had already moved on to political networking. I know you've been protecting a pack that thinks you're dead instead of just disappearing and starting over somewhere easier." I reached out, my hand finding his where it rested on his thigh, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. Monsters don't mourn, they don't protect, they don't reveal themselves to crying girls in cemeteries because they're tired of being alone. For a long moment, he said nothing. The fire crackled, shadows danced across the maps on the wall, and somewhere outside, an owl called into the November darkness. Then his hand turned beneath mine, fingers intertwining, grip almost painful in its intensity. "They're going to hate you," he said quietly. "When I return, when the truth comes out, they'll see you as my weakness, the conspirators I didn't find, the ones still hiding. They'll come for you first, I know. The females who wanted to be queen, they'll make your life a nightmare. The council members who've grown comfortable with Sebastian's softness, they'll see you as a threat. You'll go from invisible to the most visible target in the pack." His thumb traced circles on my palm, the gesture almost absent, as if he needed the physical connection to ground himself. "And I can't promise I'll always be there to protect you. Kings have duties, responsibilities, wars to fight. I know, I said again, stronger this time. Then why? His voice roughened, cracked around the edges. Why would you choose this? Choose me? The question held weight I wasn't sure I could carry. 3 years of loneliness and longing compressed into 3 words. I thought about all the gatherings I'd attended, watching him from the shadows. All the nights I'd lain awake wondering what it would be like to be seen by him. Really seen. The way he'd claimed he'd seen me all along. All the days since his supposed death when I'd moved through pack life like a ghost, going through motions without purpose. Because I've been invisible my whole life, I told him, turning to face him fully, our knees touching now. And you made me feel real. You made me feel like I mattered, even when we never spoke, even when I thought it was all in my head. And if I'm going to finally be visible, if I'm going to be seen and targeted and hated, I'd rather it be for standing beside someone who's fighting for something that matters than for hiding in the shadows alone. Something shifted in his expression, the careful control cracking to reveal raw emotion underneath, hope, maybe, or hunger, or a desperation that matched the ache in my own chest. You're going to transform me, he said. And it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a warning, like a prophecy, like a confession, pulled from somewhere deep and protected. You're going to make me soft, make me question, make me want things I trained myself not to need. Good, I whispered, and watched his eyes flare brighter. Because you're going to transform me too. Make me brave, make me strong, make me into someone who can stand in the light instead of the shadows. The kiss, when it came, wasn't gentle. It was 3 years of grief and longing and desperate hunger compressed into a single point of contact, his mouth claiming mine with a possessiveness that should have terrified me, but instead felt like coming home, his hand tangled in my blonde hair, tilting my head back to deepen the kiss, and I responded with equal fervor, fingers clutching at his shoulders, his neck, anything to pull him closer. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine, ice blue eyes holding me captive. We have 4 days, he said roughly. 4 days before I walk back into pack territory and reclaim my throne. 4 days to plan, to prepare, to transform a dead king's return into something the pack can accept without descending into chaos. What happens in 4 days? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. The winter solstice gathering, his smile was sharp enough to cut, when every pack leader, every council member, every wolf of significance will be gathered in the Great Hall, when Sebastian will stand before them as Alpha King and accept their renewed oaths of loyalty. He pulled back enough to study my face, reading something there I wasn't sure I knew how to hide. And when I'll walk through those doors and remind them all who they really belong to, the image sent ice and fire warring through my veins. Ronan, returning from the dead, reclaiming power in front of the entire pack structure. The chaos it would cause, the questions it would raise, the violence it might spark. Will there be a challenge? I asked. Will Sebastian fight you? He'll have to. There was something almost sad in Ronan's voice. Even if he doesn't want to, the pack will demand it, and Alpha can't just step aside, not without looking weak. And weakness in our world is death, I finished, or worse. He nodded slowly. I don't want to kill him, Elena. Despite everything, Sebastian is family. He's been a placeholder, nothing more. But if he challenges me in front of the pack, if pride and politics demand blood. He trailed off, but I understood what he wasn't saying. One cousin would die, and the pack would belong to whoever survived. Then we make sure it doesn't come to that, I said with more confidence than I felt. We plan, we prepare, we find a way to make your return look like salvation instead of conquest. I stopped, realizing what I'd said. We, as if I had any say in pack politics, any influence over events that would shape territorial power for generations. But Ronan was smiling, real warmth breaking through the hardness for the first time since the cemetery. We, he agreed, and the word sounded like a promise. Starting now. He stood, pulling me up with him, and led me to the wall of maps and conspiracy threads. These are the remaining threats, he said, pointing to red pins clustered around certain names. Wolves I haven't been able to confirm as loyal or traitorous. Some are probably innocent, Some are definitely not. And we have 4 days to figure out which is which before I walk into a room full of potential enemies. I stared at the web of names and connections, feeling the weight of what we were attempting settle over me like a physical thing. 4 days to prepare for a resurrection. 4 days to prevent a civil war. 4 days to somehow transform from invisible nobody into someone who could stand beside a king. Where do we start? I asked. Ronan's hand found mine again, squeezed once. We start by making you ready for what's coming. Because when I walk into that hall, Elena, you're walking in beside me. And I need you to be strong enough to survive what happens next. The fire popped loudly, making me jump. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the trees with a sound that might have been warning or might have been invitation. 4 days until everything changed. I looked up at the dead king who wasn't dead, at the man who'd seen me when I thought I was invisible, at the alpha who'd chosen me for reasons I still didn't fully understand. Make me ready, I said. And his answering smile promised that he would, no matter what it cost either of us. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of preparation that left me exhausted, terrified, and somehow more alive than I'd ever felt. Ronan's idea of making me ready involved far more than I'd anticipated. The first morning, I woke in the cabin's small bedroom, he'd insisted I take it while he took the couch, to find him already awake. Maps spread across the kitchen table, coffee brewing with a bitter intensity that matched his expression. "The council will test you," he said without preamble as I emerged, still wrapped in the blanket he'd provided. "Not physically. You're too obviously weaker than most wolves for that to prove anything. But they'll test your knowledge, your composure, your right to stand where you'll be standing." I poured myself coffee with shaking hands, the November morning cold seeping through the cabin's walls despite the fire he'd rebuilt. "What do I need to know?" "Everything." He pushed a stack of papers toward me. Genealogies, territorial maps, treaty documents, pack histories going back centuries. The northern packs have intricate hierarchies, old grudges, alliances that shift with every generation. Sebastian has simplified things, tried to make the structure more democratic. His tone made clear what he thought of that approach. But the old wolves remember how it used to be. They'll expect you to remember too, so I studied. For hours that first day, Ronan drilled me on pack lineages, on which families held which territories, on the complicated web of debts and honors and insults that governed wolf society. His teaching method was relentless. He'd ask a question, wait for my answer, then either nod approval or explain in precise detail why I was wrong and what the correct answer revealed about pack politics. "The Crescent Moon Pack holds the eastern forests," I recited during one of his rapid-fire quizzes, my head pounding from information overload. "Their alpha is Vincent Cross, who has 3 sons and 2 daughters. The eldest son, Cameron, is engaged to the daughter of the Silver Pine Alpha, which created an alliance that threatens the territorial balance," Ronan interrupted, "because Silver Pine controls the mountain passes and Crescent Moon controls the trade routes. Together, they could strangle our economy if they chose to." He leaned back, studying me with that unnerving intensity. "What do you do about it?" I stumbled, my tired brain struggling to make connections. "I don't know. Separate them somehow? Break the engagement? Too obvious. They'd see it coming, and it would make enemies of both packs." He stood, moving to the maps on the wall with the restless energy that seemed to consume him whenever he stood still too long. "You create a better option. The second son, Garrett. He's ambitious, clever, currently wasted in his brother's shadow. You elevate him. Give him territory of his own carved from neutral lands. Make him powerful enough that Cameron's engagement suddenly looks like a liability to the Crescent Moon Pack instead of an asset." The elegance of it made my head spin. "You've already done this, haven't you? 2 years ago." A ghost of a smile. "Garrett now controls the northern crossing and owes his position entirely to me. When I return, he'll remember that debt." His eyes found mine across the small space. "This is how you survive in pack politics, Elena. Not through strength, but through strategy. Through understanding what people want, and making yourself the one who can provide it. Or take it away," I murmured, understanding dawning. "Or that." By the second day, my studies had expanded beyond mere facts. Marcus arrived near noon, a wolf in his 40s with gray-streaked dark hair and scars that told stories of battles survived. He looked at me with open skepticism, his gaze cataloging every weakness before he'd even spoken a word. "This is what you're bringing to the solstice?" he asked Ronan, not bothering to lower his voice or pretend I wasn't standing right there. "A low-ranked female who looks like a strong wind would break her?" I bristled, but Ronan's hand on my shoulder kept me silent. "This," Ronan said quietly, dangerously, "is Elena Winters, and she'll be standing beside me when I reclaim my throne. Do you have a problem with that, second?" The title, spoken with absolute authority, made Marcus straighten instinctively. For a moment, tension crackled between the two males, a silent battle of wills that I could only observe. Then Marcus dropped his gaze, baring his throat in submission. "No, my king. Good." Ronan's hand squeezed my shoulder once before releasing. "Then teach her what she needs to know about the wolves who'll want her dead." What followed was perhaps more brutal than the academic lessons. Marcus walked me through every major player in pack politics with clinical precision, detailing not just their positions and allegiances, but their personal vendettas, their weaknesses, their methods of attacking perceived threats. "Victoria Blackthorne," he said, pointing to a photograph pinned to the conspiracy wall. "A stunning female wolf with midnight hair and eyes like amber flames. She wanted to be queen before Ronan's supposed death. She's currently Sebastian's most trusted advisor, which tells you everything about her political skills. She'll see you as competition and she doesn't fight fair. How will she come at me?" I asked, forcing myself to study the photograph, to memorize the face of someone who would become an enemy. Socially. Marcus's tone was matter-of-fact. "She'll spread rumors, question your bloodline, make jokes about Ronan choosing weakness over strength. She'll never challenge you directly because that would give you legitimacy. Instead, she'll make you feel so unwelcome, so scrutinized, so small that you'll want to disappear on your own." The description hit too close to home. I'd spent my whole life trying to disappear, trying to avoid exactly that kind of attention. And how do I counter that? You don't. Ronan had been listening from where he worked on other preparations, but now he looked up, his gaze intense. "You let her do her worst, and you stand there anyway. You smile when she insults you, thank her for her concern when she questions your worthiness, and you never, ever let her see that she's gotten to you. That sounds like..." I swallowed hard. "That sounds impossible." "It is," Marcus agreed bluntly. "For most wolves. But you're not most wolves, are you? You survived years of being invisible by developing armor others can't see. Now you just need to transform that armor from hiding to shielding." He made it sound simple. It wasn't. The afternoon of the second day, they put theory into practice. Marcus played Victoria while Ronan watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The second was vicious in his mimicry, throwing insults with surgical precision, each one designed to find and exploit my deepest insecurities. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met," Marcus's Victoria said with false sweetness. "Though I suppose that's not surprising. I tend not to notice wolves from bloodlines so diluted they barely register as pack members." My face burned, but I forced myself to smile. "We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Elena Winters." "And you're right. My bloodline is diluted. It's given me a unique perspective on pack dynamics that pure-blooded wolves sometimes miss." Marcus raised an eyebrow, partially breaking character. "Not bad. But she won't stop there." "Of course not," I muttered. He continued, relentless. "How fascinating that Ronan has chosen you. Though I suppose after 3 years of being dead, his standards may have adjusted." That one hit harder. The implication that I was second-rate, a choice made from desperation rather than desire. I glanced at Ronan, saw him watching with that unnerving stillness, giving me nothing. "I can't imagine how difficult these 3 years have been for everyone," I said carefully, turning the insult back on itself. "We've all had to adjust, haven't we? Some of us are just more adaptable than others." Ronan's lip twitched. Marcus actually smiled. "She'll hate you for that," he said, dropping the act, "but she'll also respect you a little, which might keep her from going straight for blood." The third day brought Iris, the witch who'd maintained Ronan's death glamour. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with copper hair and eyes that saw too much. She studied me with the same skepticism Marcus had shown, but hers felt deeper, more fundamental. "You're not strong enough," she said bluntly after watching me for all of 5 minutes. "Your wolf is weak, your magic is dormant, your body is soft. Any alpha female could tear you apart." "I know," I said, tired of defending myself, tired of justifications. "But I'm here anyway. Why?" Iris moved closer, her gaze searching. "What could possibly make you think you can survive what's coming?" I looked past her to where Ronan worked at the table, his focus apparently on documents. But I knew he was listening to every word, because someone finally saw me. I said quietly. "And I'd rather die visible than live invisible." Iris was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out, her fingers pressing against my forehead with surprising warmth. "You have power," she said, and she didn't sound pleased about it. "Dormant, yes, but there. Your bloodline isn't as diluted as you think. The magic just sleeps deeper. I can wake it, but it won't be pleasant." "Do it," I said before I could reconsider. What followed was 3 hours of the most intense pain I'd ever experienced. Iris worked methodically, using herbs and chants and touches that felt like fire racing through my veins, burning away whatever blocks had kept my wolf small and my magic hidden. Ronan held me through the worst of it, his arms the only thing keeping me grounded as my body tried to reject the transformation. When it finally ended, I collapsed against him, shaking and nauseous, but somehow different. Lighter, clearer. I could feel my wolf now, really feel her. Not the weak echo I'd grown accustomed to, but something with teeth, with strength, with presence. "Better," Iris pronounced, packing away her supplies. "Still not strong enough to challenge the top-tier females, but at least now you won't look like prey." Ronan's hand stroked through my sweat-dampened hair, the gesture tender in a way that contradicted the predator everyone else saw. "Rest," he murmured against my temple. "Tomorrow is the solstice. Tomorrow everything changes." That night I couldn't sleep. The cabin felt too small, the walls too close, the weight of what tomorrow would bring pressing down until I couldn't breathe. I found Ronan outside on the porch, staring into the darkness with that terrible stillness that meant his mind was miles away. "Doubts?" I asked quietly, moving to stand beside him, always. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on something in the forest I couldn't see. "I'm asking you to walk into a room full of wolves who will want you gone. To stand beside a king they think is a ghost. To help me reclaim a throne that might not be worth the blood it will cost." His jaw tightened. "And I can't promise I can protect you from all of it." "I know." "Then you're braver than I am." I turned to face him fully, waited until he looked at me, or more foolish. But I've spent my whole life being careful, being safe, being invisible. And where did it get me? Alone. Grieving someone I never really knew. Trapped in a half-life that wasn't worth living. I reached for his hand, laced our fingers together, at least this way. If I fall, I'll fall fighting for something that matters. He pulled me against him, arms wrapping around me with desperate intensity. "I'm going to make you a target," he said into my hair. "I'm going to paint a mark on your back that every enemy I have will aim for, and I'm selfish enough to do it anyway, because the thought of walking into that hall without you is worse than any other fear I carry." "Then we're both selfish," I whispered, "because I'm not letting you walk in there alone." We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the November cold, while somewhere in the forest, wolves howled greetings to the almost full moon. Tomorrow, that moon would reach its peak. Tomorrow, the solstice gathering would bring every wolf of significance to the Great Hall. Tomorrow, a dead king would rise and the woman who'd cried at his grave would stand beside him. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for these last few hours of anonymity, of safety, of preparation, tonight we had each other and the darkness and the knowledge that we'd chosen this path together. "Consequences be damned, Elena," Ronan said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept buried. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, I need you to know that you've already saved me. You've given me a reason to return that has nothing to do with duty or vengeance or power. You've reminded me what it means to want something just for myself. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes, saw vulnerability there that the mighty Alpha King would never show anyone else. Then save me back, I said. Show me what it means to be brave enough to be seen. His kiss was gentler this time, reverent, a promise sealed in the darkness. And when we finally went back inside, when I lay down in the small bedroom knowing sleep wouldn't come, I felt the weight of tomorrow settling over me like armor, 4 days of preparation condensed into one final truth. I was either about to become a queen or a cautionary tale. Either way, I'd never be invisible again. The great hall blazed with light and life, every torch lit, every surface polished to gleaming perfection for the winter solstice gathering. I stood in the shadows of the side entrance with Ronan, Marcus flanking us like a silent guardian, and tried to remember how to breathe. Through the partially open door, I could see hundreds of wolves packed into the massive space, alphas and their mates, council members in their formal robes, enforcers positioned strategically around the perimeter, lower-ranked pack members filling the galleries above. The air thrummed with power and anticipation, the collective energy of so many predators in one space making my newly awakened wolf whimper nervously. "Sebastian will speak first," Ronan murmured, his hand resting at the small of my back, grounding me. "He'll accept the renewed oaths, thank the pack for their loyalty, make promises about the future, standard solstice ceremony. We wait until he's finished, until the moment is complete." His ice-blue eyes met mine in the dim corridor. "Then we walk in, and the world ends," I whispered. His lip quirked. "Or begins again." Inside, Sebastian had taken the raised platform at the hall's center, standing beneath the ancient pack banner, a silver wolf on a black field, eyes picked out in sapphires that caught the torchlight. He looked the part of Alpha King, I'd give him that. Tall, commanding, his dark blonde hair styled perfectly, his formal attire emphasizing broad shoulders and the carefully cultivated authority he'd built over 3 years. But standing beside him was Victoria Blackthorn, resplendent in deep crimson that made her look like living flame. And the possessive way Sebastian's hand occasionally brushed her arm told a story I hadn't known existed. They're together, I breathed, understanding dawning. That's why she's his closest advisor. For 2 years now, Ronan confirmed, his voice carefully neutral, which complicates things. She won't just be defending her own position when we walk in there. She'll be defending his. Marcus leaned closer. The council doesn't approve. They see it as weakness, an alpha swayed by a beautiful face. But Sebastian won't be moved on it. I watched Victoria smile up at Sebastian, saw genuine affection there beneath the political calculation, and felt something twist in my chest. They were in love, and we were about to destroy their world. "Does he deserve this?" I asked quietly, not sure I wanted the answer. Sebastian has been a good alpha, hasn't he? Kept the peace, maintained alliances, avoided war. He's been a competent administrator, Ronan said, his tone making clear the distinction. But good alphas don't let traitors infiltrate their councils. They don't create vulnerabilities through emotional attachments. They don't... He stopped, his jaw tightening. They don't let their packs grow soft. Inside, Sebastian had begun speaking, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics. 3 years ago, we lost our king. 3 years ago, the northern packs faced their darkest hour, and many thought we wouldn't survive. The crowd murmured agreement, a ripple of remembered grief passing through the assembled wolves. But we did survive, Sebastian continued, his voice growing stronger. We adapted. We rebuilt. We proved that strength comes not from one wolf, no matter how powerful, but from the pack united. And tonight, on this longest night, I stand before you to say that our future is bright, our territories secure, our alliances strong. Applause filled the hall, genuine and warm. These wolves believed in him. They'd followed him through crisis and come out the other side intact. "We're going to break their hearts," I said, the realization settling over me like ice water. Ronan's hand tightened on my back. "We're going to save their lives. Sebastian's softness has created vulnerabilities he doesn't even see. The foreign interests that tried to buy our territories haven't given up. They've just gotten quieter, more insidious. In another year, maybe 2, they'll own enough council members to vote Sebastian out, or worse. His gaze was iron. I'm not letting that happen. Marcus checked his watch. 2 minutes. The oaths are next, then the closing blessing. After that, we remind them who they really belong to, Ronan finished. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched Sebastian accept the first oath, a territorial alpha approaching the platform to pledge loyalty and resources. One by one, others followed. The ritual ancient, sacred, binding. With each oath spoken, I felt the weight of what we were about to interrupt grow heavier. These weren't just political statements. These were wolves pledging their lives, their families, their futures to the alpha they believed in. And we were about to tell them it was all based on a lie. I can't do this, I whispered, panic rising. Ronan, I can't. He turned to me fully, his hands coming up to frame my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. Yes, you can, because this isn't about destroying what Sebastian built. It's about protecting it. These wolves deserve a king strong enough to see the threats he can't, ruthless enough to eliminate them before they strike, powerful enough that foreign interests don't even try. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, and they deserve a queen brave enough to stand in the light, even when it would be easier to hide. I'm not a queen, I protested. Not yet. His smile was sharp, dangerous, beautiful, but you will be. Inside, the final oath was being spoken, an elderly council member's voice trembling with emotion as he pledged loyalty until death. The crowd was silent, respectful, the solemnity of the moment, holding everyone captive. Now, Ronan said. Marcus pushed the door open fully, the sudden movement and sound drawing immediate attention. Conversations died mid-word, heads turned, and into that shocked silence, Ronan Gray walked back into a world that had mourned him as dead. He moved with the same predatory grace I remembered, but there was something more now, an authority so absolute it seemed to bend the very air around him. Wolves instinctively moved aside, creating a path toward the platform where Sebastian stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been joy before political calculation took over. I followed 2 steps behind and to Ronan's right, the position Marcus had drilled into me, close enough to show unity, far enough to show respect for his dominance. Every eye in the hall tracked our progress, and I could feel the moment they noticed me, the whispers starting like wildfire through dry grass. Who is she? Why is she with him? Is that Elena Winters? Victoria's face had gone white, her amber eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't name. She moved closer to Sebastian, protective, and I saw her hand drop to where a blade would be concealed beneath her formal gown. We reached the platform. Ronan stood at its base, looking up at his cousin with an expression I couldn't read. The silence had become absolute, hundreds of wolves holding their collective breath. "Hello, Sebastian," Ronan said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "I hope I'm not too late to renew my own oath." The shock broke like a dam. Voices erupted from every corner. Questions, accusations, demands for explanation. Several wolves shifted partially, instinct overriding control, the air filling with the musk of aggression and fear. Sebastian raised a hand, and gradually the noise subsided. His face had settled into careful neutrality, but I could see his mind working frantically behind his eyes. "Ronan," he said, and his voice only shook slightly. "We buried you. We mourned you. I accepted the crown because you were dead." "I know," Ronan's tone was almost gentle. "And I'm sorry for that deception. But it was necessary to root out the conspirators who'd infiltrated our council, our territories, our very pack structure. Conspirators who would have destroyed everything our bloodline built if I'd fought them openly." Murmurs rippled through the crowd again. I saw council members exchanging glances, saw certain wolves beginning to edge toward the exits. "The assassins who attacked me 3 years ago weren't random enemies," Ronan continued, his voice hardening. "They were hired by wolves in this very hall. Wolves who sit on our council, who hold our territories, who smiled to my face while plotting to sell our lands piece by piece to foreign interests." "That's a serious accusation," Sebastian said carefully. "Do you have proof?" "I have 17 corpses." The casual way Ronan said it sent ice through the hall. 17 conspirators who I tracked, confronted, and eliminated over the past 3 years. Their crimes are documented, their confessions recorded, their treachery beyond dispute. He pulled a folder from inside his coat, held it up. Everything is here. Names, dates, transactions, proof of foreign gold exchanging hands for territorial access. Sebastian's hand trembled as he reached for the folder. But before he could take it, Victoria moved, her blade suddenly visible, her body positioning between Sebastian and Ronan with lethal grace. "Convenient," she said, her voice cold as winter ice. "The dead king returns with accusations against wolves who can't defend themselves because he's already executed them. How do we know you didn't just eliminate anyone who questioned your methods? How do we know you're not the real threat?" The crowd's energy shifted, wolves picking sides without even realizing it. I saw Marcus tense beside us, saw enforcers throughout the hall moving into strategic positions. This could go wrong so fast. Ronan didn't even look at Victoria. His gaze stayed locked on Sebastian, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. "You know, cousin. You felt it. The wrong choices being pushed on you. The advice that served others' interests instead of the pack's. The subtle pressure to make alliances that weakened rather than strengthened our position." He paused. "You're a good man, Sebastian, but good men don't always make strong kings." Sebastian's face crumpled slightly, pain breaking through the political mask. "You let me think you were dead. You let me grieve. Let me struggle. Let me take a crown I never wanted, all while you were out there playing executioner and judge." "Yes," Ronan said simply. "Because the pack needed a king they could see while I hunted the monsters they couldn't. And because I needed to know who would remain loyal when the strongest wolf was gone." His gaze swept the hall, cataloging every face, every reaction. "Some of you proved your honor, others—" His eyes landed on specific wolves scattered through the crowd, and I saw several flinch. "Others revealed exactly what you were worth." "This is madness," Victoria spat. "You can't just walk in here after 3 years and demand—" "I'm not demanding anything," Ronan's voice cut through hers like a blade. "I'm reclaiming what's mine by right of blood, right of strength, and right of service to this pack. But I'm not Sebastian. I won't take it through words and politics alone." He finally looked at Victoria, and his smile was all teeth. "If you want to challenge me, female, I'll face you right now, though we both know how that would end." Victoria's hand tightened on her blade, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. The difference in power between them was too vast, and every wolf in the hall could sense it. "No?" Ronan's gaze shifted back to Sebastian. "Then perhaps the Alpha would like to make the challenge official." Sebastian stood there, the folder in his hands now, his expression anguished. Around us, the hall held its breath again, waiting to see if this would end in blood or surrender. "I don't want to fight you," Sebastian said quietly. "You're my family. He swallowed hard. "You're my king. You always have been." The words hung in the air, heavy with grief and relief and resignation. "But they'll demand it," Sebastian continued, gesturing to the crowd. "They'll see it as weakness if I just step aside. Some of them might even challenge you themselves if they think you've grown soft during your absence. Let them try." Ronan's voice was iron wrapped in silk. "I've killed 17 conspirators in 3 years. What's a few more challengers?" Movement in the crowd. A large male stepping forward, his formal clothes barely containing the muscle beneath. I recognized him from my studies. Vincent Cross, Alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack, father to the sons Ronan had mentioned manipulating. "I challenge," Vincent said, his voice carrying, "for the right to question your claim, to examine your so-called evidence, to determine if you're fit to lead or just a ghost with delusions." The hall erupted again, half supporting the challenge, half calling it treason. I felt Ronan's hand find mine, squeeze once. Reassurance or farewell, I couldn't tell. "Accepted," Ronan said calmly, as if Vincent hadn't just challenged him to potential death. He turned to me, his ice-blue eyes holding mine for a long moment. "Wait here." "Ronan, trust me." He released my hand, began removing his coat with deliberate movements. "This won't take long." Marcus moved to my side as Ronan approached the center of the hall, where Vincent was already stripping off his formal shirt, revealing a physique built for combat. "Should we be worried?" I whispered. Only if you think Vincent has learned to fight in the 3 years since Ronan killed 14 wolves in a single night, Marcus said dryly. This is theater, Elena. Necessary theater to establish dominance, but theater nonetheless. The fight, when it began, was brutal and efficient. Vincent lunged with the confidence of a wolf who'd won dozens of challenges, his size and strength obvious advantages. But Ronan moved like water, like shadow, like something that existed between seconds. He avoided Vincent's attacks with minimal effort, not even bothering to counter until the larger wolf was breathing hard, frustration making him sloppy. Then Ronan struck. I'd read about his fighting style, heard the stories, but witnessing it was something else entirely. 3 moves, a feint, a strike to the throat that didn't quite connect, but made Vincent flinch, and a sweep that sent the larger wolf crashing to the stone floor with enough force to crack it. Ronan's hand wrapped around Vincent's throat, claws extended just enough to draw thin lines of crimson, his eyes blazing with dominance that made every wolf in the hall instinctively lower their gaze. Submit, Ronan said quietly, or die. Choose quickly. Vincent's answer was a choked gasp of surrender, his throat bearing fully in submission that couldn't be misinterpreted. Ronan released him, stood, didn't even look back as Vincent scrambled away. His gaze swept the hall instead, landing on each alpha, each council member, each wolf of significance. Anyone else? He asked conversationally. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Good. Ronan walked back to where I stood, took my hand again as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just reminded everyone why they'd feared him in the first place. Then let's finish this. He turned to Sebastian, who still stood on the platform looking smaller somehow, diminished by Ronan's presence. I'm taking back my throne, cousin. But I'm not taking it by force, not from you. You've kept the pack alive when they needed stability. For that, you have my gratitude and my respect. His voice softened slightly. Step aside willingly, and I'll make sure every wolf here knows it was the honorable choice. Sebastian looked at Victoria, something passing between them in that glance. Then he looked back at Ronan, and slowly, deliberately, he knelt. I, Sebastian Grey, relinquish my claim to the Northern Throne, and pledge my loyalty to the true Alpha King, Ronan Grey, returned from death to protect his people. One by one, others began to kneel. Marcus first, his submission absolute, then the council members who'd remained loyal, then the territorial alphas, even Vincent still bleeding from his throat, then the lower-ranked wolves, hundreds of them, until the entire hall was kneeling except for Ronan, me, and a handful of wolves too shocked to move. Victoria remained standing longest, her amber eyes burning with fury and grief and reluctant acceptance. Finally, she too knelt, though her gaze never left Ronan's face. And there, in that hall full of kneeling wolves, Ronan Grey reclaimed his crown. He looked down at me, still standing because he hadn't released my hand, hadn't let me kneel with the others. And now, he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, I introduce you to your queen. The words hung in the air like a physical force, and I felt every eye in the hall shift to me, really see me, perhaps for the first time. Not the invisible low-ranked wolf who'd haunted the edges of gatherings, but the woman standing beside their returned king, elevated to a position that would make me either revered or destroyed. My newly awakened wolf stirred, uncertain but no longer cowering. The power Iris had unlocked thrummed beneath my skin, not strong enough to challenge the dominant females in this hall, but enough to keep me standing when every instinct screamed to kneel, to hide, to disappear back into the safety of invisibility. But I'd promised Ronan I'd be brave enough to be seen, so I lifted my chin, met the stares head-on, and felt something shift inside me. The final transformation from shadow to light, from hidden to visible, from nobody to someone who mattered. Victoria was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. You can't be serious. She'd risen from her kneel, propriety abandoned in favor of raw disbelief. She's barely even pack, Ronan. Her bloodline is so diluted she can hardly shift. What possible qualification does she have to be queen? She saw me when I was invisible, Ronan said simply, his hand still wrapped around mine. She mourned me when everyone else had moved on. And she chose to stand beside me knowing exactly what it would cost her. His ice blue eyes swept the hall. That's more qualification than bloodline or strength could ever provide. That's sentiment, Victoria shot back, though I heard the tremor beneath her anger. Fear, perhaps, of losing everything she'd built. Queens need to be strong, political, capable of... Compassion? I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Every head swiveled toward me, and I felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. You're right that I'm not strong. You're right that my bloodline is weak, that I can barely shift, that by traditional standards I have no business standing here. I paused, gathering courage from the pressure of Ronan's hand. But I've spent my entire life watching this pack from the shadows. I've seen things wolves in power miss because they're too busy maintaining dominance to notice the vulnerabilities beneath. I took a breath, committing fully to whatever came next. I saw my father work himself to exhaustion serving a king who barely acknowledged his existence, and I learned that loyalty matters more than recognition. I watched my mother die slowly, abandoned by a pack that values strength over care, and I learned that compassion isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us human. My gaze found Sebastian, then Victoria, and I've watched good wolves try their best while being undermined by traitors they trusted, and I learned that seeing clearly is worth more than fighting fiercely. The silence that followed felt different, contemplative rather than hostile, though Victoria's expression remained thunderous. Pretty words, she said. But words don't protect territories or win battles or keep the pack safe when enemies come. No, Ronan agreed. I do that. Elena does something equally important. She reminds me why those territories, those battles, that safety actually matter. He released my hand, moving to face the assembled wolves with the absolute authority of a king who'd never really stopped ruling. For 3 years, I've lived in shadows, hunting monsters, eliminating threats, and I was good at it. Efficient. Ruthless. But I was also becoming the very thing I was fighting against, a wolf who valued power over people, who saw pack members as assets or liabilities instead of lives worth protecting. His voice softened just slightly. Elena reminded me what I was fighting for. Not power, not dominance, not even justice, but for the chance to build something where wolves like her father are honored for their loyalty, where wolves like her mother aren't left to die alone, where strength and compassion can coexist instead of being seen as opposites. He turned back to me, and the expression on his face made my breath catch. Vulnerability and determination, and something that looked almost like hope. She's not queen because she's strong. She's queen because she makes me better. And if this pack is going to survive what's coming, we need leaders who can be both ruthless and kind, both powerful and compassionate, both feared and loved. Marcus stepped forward then, his scarred face solemn. I've served Ronan Gray for 15 years. I've seen him kill without hesitation, rule without mercy, and eliminate threats before they fully formed. And I've never questioned his strength or his commitment to this pack. He looked at me, something almost like approval in his eyes. But in 3 days with Elena Winters, I've seen him become something more than a weapon. If she can do that, if she can remind our king of his humanity without diminishing his power, then she's exactly the queen we need. One by one, others began to speak. Garrett Cross, the second son Ronan had elevated, pledging his support with obvious calculation of political advantage. Council members who'd remained loyal during the conspiracy, expressing relief that their king had returned. Even some of the lower-ranked wolves, their voices hesitant but genuine, speaking about times I'd helped them, noticed them, shown them kindness when everyone else looked through them. I'd thought I was invisible, but apparently some people had been watching all along. Sebastian was the last to speak, rising from his kneel with Victoria's hand in his, their fingers intertwined in a gesture that spoke of solidarity and shared grief. Ronan, I won't pretend this doesn't hurt. I won't pretend I'm not angry about the deception. The years of believing you were dead. the burden of a crown I never wanted. His voice roughened. But I also can't pretend you're wrong. About the conspirators, about my weaknesses, about what the pack needs. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw understanding in his eyes. Elena, I'm sorry for every time I looked past you, every gathering where you went unnoticed, every moment the pack failed to value what you offered. If you can forgive that, if you can help Ronan build something better than what we had, then you have my support. Victoria's face was anguished, torn between loyalty to Sebastian and her own wounded pride. Finally she spoke, her voice tight but controlled. I don't like this. I don't like you, she said, looking directly at me. But Sebastian's right. The pack failed you, and wolves like you. Maybe... She swallowed hard. Maybe that's something worth changing. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a beginning. The formal ceremony that followed blurred together. Ronan officially reclaiming his throne, me being presented as his chosen queen, oaths being renewed with new understanding of what they meant. By the time the gathering finally dispersed near dawn, I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and still not entirely convinced I hadn't dreamed the entire night. But Ronan's hand remained solid in mine as we left the great hall, Marcus clearing a path through wolves who now looked at us with a mixture of awe, fear, and cautious hope. Where are we going? I asked, as he led me not toward the main pack house, but toward the forest paths I'd walked alone so many times. Somewhere we can finally breathe, he said. We ended up at a clearing I'd never seen before, hidden deep in the northern woods where moonlight filtered through ancient pines and the air smelled of snow and possibilities. A small cabin stood there, larger than the safe house, but still intimate, smoke already rising from its chimney. I had Marcus prepare it, Ronan explained, pulling me inside where warmth and firelight waited. I thought, after everything, we might need a place that's just ours. No politics, no pack dynamics, no eyes watching every move. I looked around the space, comfortable furniture, a kitchen stocked with supplies, a bedroom visible through an open door, and felt something in my chest unclench. It's perfect. It's temporary, he corrected, pulling me toward the fire. Eventually, we'll have to return to the pack house, take up residence in the royal quarters, play the parts we've claimed. But for tonight, for the next few days, I want to just be Ronan and Elena. Not king and queen, not alpha and omega, just us, I finished, understanding completely. He cupped my face in his hands, thumbs tracing my cheekbones with a gentleness that still surprised me. You were magnificent tonight, brave and honest and strong in ways that have nothing to do with dominance or power. Watching you stand there, refusing to hide, refusing to apologize for what you are. His voice caught. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. Tears burned behind my eyes, but they were good tears, cleansing tears, the release of 3 years of grief and fear and loneliness finally finding their way out. I was terrified, I know. He kissed my forehead, my temples, the tears tracking down my cheeks. But you stood anyway. That's what courage actually is, not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. I pulled him closer, buried my face in his neck, breathed in his scent of pine and smoke and safety. What happens now? Now? His arms tightened around me. Now we rest. Tomorrow we start the real work, rebuilding the council, strengthening our alliances, rooting out any remaining threats. We'll face Victoria's resentment and the traditional wolves who think I've made a mistake. We'll navigate pack politics and territorial disputes, and probably a dozen challenges to both our positions. Sounds exhausting, I murmured against his skin. It will be. He pulled back enough to meet my eyes, and his smile was genuine, warm, the expression of a man who'd finally found something worth smiling about. But we'll face it together. And when it gets too overwhelming, when the politics and the power games and the expectations become too much, we'll come back here. To this place where we're just us, just two wolves who found each other in a cemetery and decided to be brave enough to be seen. I kissed him then, pouring 3 years of longing and grief and hope into the contact, and he responded with equal intensity, his hands tangling in my blonde hair, his body pressing against mine with desperate need that had nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with connection. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said, the words simple and devastating. "I loved you when I watched you from across crowded halls. I loved you when I had to leave you believing I was dead, and I love you now for being brave enough to stand in the light with me." "I love you too," I whispered back, the truth of it filling every hollow place inside me, even when you were just a ghost haunting my memories, even when loving you meant grieving someone I'd never really known, even now, when loving you means becoming visible to wolves who'll want me gone. "They'll learn," he said fiercely. "They'll learn that you're not going anywhere, that you're my queen, my equal, my partner in every way that matters, and anyone who threatens you will learn exactly why wolves used to fear Ronan Gray. The possessiveness should have bothered me. Instead, it felt like protection, like being valued enough that someone would fight for my right to exist in spaces I'd always been excluded from. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in firelight, while outside the winter solstice night slowly gave way to dawn. The longest night of the year ending, light returning, new beginnings emerging from the darkness. I thought about my mother's words, about compassion being strong enough to survive. I thought about my father's loyalty, about invisible wolves finally being seen, about the power of choosing courage over safety. And I thought about the girl who'd cried at a king's grave, never knowing he was watching, never imagining she'd one day stand beside him as his queen. That girl was gone now, transformed into someone who could face Victoria's resentment and the council's scrutiny and the pack's expectations without flinching. Someone who understood that being seen meant being vulnerable, but that vulnerability honestly expressed was its own kind of strength. "Elena," Ronan murmured, drawing me toward the bedroom with gentle insistence. "Rest. Tomorrow we face the pack as their king and queen, but tonight we're just ours." I let him lead me, let him hold me as we lay down together in the soft bed, his arms wrapped around me like a shield against everything waiting outside this cabin, this moment, this perfect, temporary peace. "Thank you," I whispered into the darkness, "for seeing me, for making me matter." "You always mattered," he said against my hair. "I just gave you a stage big enough for everyone else to notice what I'd seen all along." And as sleep finally claimed me, safe and warm and loved in ways I'd never imagined possible, I smiled. The invisible girl had become a queen, and the dead king had come back to life. Together we'd face whatever came next, the politics and the challenges, and the wolves who'd never accept us. But we'd face it as equals, as partners, as two people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. The winter solstice had passed, the longest night had ended, and with the dawn came the promise of something neither of us had believed possible, a future where strength and compassion coexisted, where being seen meant being valued, where love was powerful enough to transform kings and queens and entire packs. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But standing in the light beside someone who loved me for exactly who I was, that was worth every challenge, every threat, every moment of fear. That was worth everything.